Hello and welcome. It's time for Catalog and Cocktails, your honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd, product guy, customer guy at Data.World, joined by Juan Cicada.
Hey Tim, how are you doing? It's Wednesday. It is middle of the week. Always a beautiful time to take a break and go chat about data. And today we are going to be chatting one of the topics that are just goes back to our core of who we are and why we started cataloging cocktails. The cocktails part, I mean, we all know we like cocktails, but the catalog is kind of comes from the data catalogs and the metadata space. And we're going to talk a lot about metadata. And really excited to have Mike Evans, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Amplifi. Mike, how are you doing?
Welcome, Mike.
I'm really good, thank you both. Great to be here. Great to see you.
Yeah, well, we're super excited to get into the topic that is very dear and near to our heart. But hey, let's kick it off with our tell and toast. What are you all drinking today, or what's your favorite drink, and what are we gonna be toasting for?
Well, I'm drinking. It's a non-alcoholic mojito because I've got to drive after this. But I'm gonna toast. I'm gonna toast to my wife's birthday, which is tomorrow. So that's that.
That's awesome.
Congratulations to your wife, and always a fun time. I love birthdays. I really love celebrating. I'm the person who tells people or reminds people, "Hey, it's my birthday. It's my birthday," because I just like celebrating it. So, Tim, how about you?
Well, it's we're doing this episode a little earlier in the day than usual, so unfortunately, I don't have a true cocktail. I am drinking a delicious, luxurious bottled Frappuccino, which is from Starbucks. It is of the pumpkin spice variety, but I will say, you know what's a great cocktail I've been having lately? I've been experimenting with different ones. I recently discovered the Ward 8, which is a decent cocktail, so I recommend folks checking that out and trying to make a Ward 8.
Expand on that. Ward 8, what is it?
Yeah, it's got rye whiskey. It's got some lemon juice and some orange juice and some grenadine in it, and it's just a tasty drink. Tastes good.
Sounds nice. Also morning, I'm still having my coffee, but actually one of the things I did recently was doing some a whiskey sour. I actually don't do that often, and I'm like, I mean, because I was like cooking and I needed some extra yolks, and I had the white leftover. It's like, oh, there's signs right now. I need to go do something. So tried that, and yeah, it's great. I love because one of my favorite drinks of all times is a pisco sour. So I think that's one of
that sounds
very
good.
dangerous drinks, right? You drink one, two of those, and like, oh, this is nothing. And then you stand up like, oh, what the heck? All right. Well, we got a warm-up question, which is, what is something that you haven't extracted enough value from, and it's sitting right in front of you?
Well, I guess perhaps slightly predictably, my answer is going to be for most organizations, and I include like ourselves in that. It is the metadata that you produce from day to day as part of your lives, as part of your jobs, and almost every interaction that you have with any system or process in your organization.
Well, that's gonna be the topic. We're gonna dive a lot into that. Tim, what do you have right now? What is something in front of you that you're not extracting enough value from?
I will go not pure data, and I'm not going to go pure personal. It's going to be someplace in the middle. I haven't extracted the full value out of this nice microphone that I have. I should be creating more content, and Juan should too. We should be creating more content. So that's some value that's not tapped fully.
Yeah, well, I think part of that is like we just need more days, more hours in a day, more days in a week.
We need 48 hours a day instead of 24, right?
Well, I think one of the stuff I have is I'm on my desk right now, but it lifts. I mean, it's a standing desk, and I realize, I mean, just asking this question, like, I have this stuff right in front of me. I'm not standing enough, and then I complain like, why does my back?
You should raise it right now. Raise your desk right now.
I actually, you know what? I'm going to go do that. So hopefully, but in the meantime, let's kick it off. Honest, no, yeah. Okay. Let's start off with examples of untapped value of metadata, and how does this connect to this whole concept of active metadata?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess maybe the first thing to think about when we answer that question. So if I almost to start with the second part of the question first, if that helps. So organizations everywhere, we create metadata all the time. So data about the data that we hold, and that could that could be things like the definitions of the data that you store or you care about as an organization, definitions of key business entities or attributes or things like that. But it could also be data about how that data is interacted with. So it could be this data has been accessed this many times, it's flown through this many integrations, it's been included in this many reports, it's been liked and approved by these people, or it's been rated as high quality by these people. All of that information, I think organizations are kind of getting better at acknowledging that they need to capture some of that information, and obviously, you know, we're talking about data catalog as a big part of this, and data catalogs, the value of data catalogs is being, I think, held in higher regard than perhaps it was 10 years ago or so. But kind of capturing the metadata and exposing the metadata to people and to machines is one thing, but actually doing something with it is another. So that's kind of where we start to get this concept of active metadata. So active metadata, like I like to think about it as just applying the same sort of analytic techniques that we'd apply to spot patterns in data, but applying that to metadata in order to inform things about our organizations and the way that they operate, so that we can make real improvements to the way that we operate. And if I think about kind of examples of that, it's quite a it's quite an abstract topic. I think I find it quite a difficult topic. Certainly when I first kind of learned about the concept of active metadata, it feels like something that's quite hard to get your head around. So, well, why would I want to do that? But when you start looking at kind of real use cases where we monitor metadata in an organization and react to changes in that metadata, it's actually it's a bit kind of simpler to understand, but B, it's also probably a bit closer to home in terms of it's easy to spot quite simple use cases that can be used for improvement straight away. Like, so if I take so one of the kind of one of the interesting use cases that's perhaps along the simpler end of what you could achieve with metadata activation is using metadata to kind of prevent failure or quickly remedy failures. So spotting patterns in data, perhaps in data quality, so you know, we monitor this data that's coming in on a stream for against certain quality metrics, and we've suddenly noticed that the level of quality has dropped from, you know, 90% in this field down to 70%. Okay, that indicates there's some anomaly. Maybe something's happened upstream that we need to deal with before it starts to impact things downstream. Those are quite easy scenarios to conceptualize, and yet they're very powerful uses of metadata activation. So we're using some metadata that we have and turning it into some action that we can take to prevent a particular scenario. When you kind of abstract that into kind of looking at all the metadata that you have in an organization and the kind of insights that it could deliver, you start to think about use cases where, okay, my metadata is telling me that we created all these load of great reports, and we thought they were the best set of reports and dashboards that the organization needed and wanted, and we found out that no one's actually ever accessed them, or only one person's ever accessed them very, very occasionally. They're not being used, they're not being run. And so you first of all, you present an argument for, well, the data's telling us maybe we should decommission these, or it's at least telling us that we can take some action on them. It might also tell us that loads of people are extracting data from other sources and doing some work in Excel or something to bring them together. So actually, maybe we want to create some reporting assets over the top of that. So that's a bit of a flavor of the type of thing that we can do.
Yeah, no, I think this is interesting. So, Mike, I think you've so two things, right? Well, first of all, is you mentioned the word catalog, right? Like people kind of have understood for a while now that collecting metadata is important. That importance is growing, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But from quality to AI to these different trends, compliance, which make metadata even more important. But previous use cases, or sort of the traditional use cases around metadata, have tended to be more well, we want to make sure that people can discover it, or we want to make sure we can organize it, or it's a little bit more taxonomical or librarian oriented, or perhaps discovery oriented, right? But what you're talking about is this sort of contrast between maybe that's more of a passive use case, whereas, what could you be doing with your metadata that inspires action, that inspires insight, that inspires efficiencies? Essentially, what we wrote down here in our notes, kind of Juan and I, we're always taking notes when we do this, right?
Yeah.
Is we wrote down metadata analytics. Like you're analyzing your metadata and trying to use that to spur action. Is that kind of how you would describe what active metadata is?
Yeah, absolutely. You and if you think as well of all of the different techniques that we've got and the tools that we have available to try and extract some insight from that metadata, you start to see kind of how powerful it could be. But absolutely, it's applying those analytic techniques on top of the metadata that we're creating, and in itself, it's a very broad term. Organizations generate vast amounts of metadata, and you can start getting really abstract about the what constitutes metadata and how much of it there is, and analyzing all of it is almost certainly overkill. But there are certain use cases that I think are kind of like almost obvious applications of metadata activation, and the fact that we're getting such advances in areas like AI make us, put us ourselves in a position where the insight that we can gain from the metadata is that bit more powerful.
So I was back channeling with Tim, and I'm like, you know what? It really hit me, and I can't believe I'm just realizing this now, that all of this active metadata, or using your metadata, this is just metadata analytics, right? We talk about data analytics, and I just did a quick Google search, and I'm like, for searching for metadata analytics, that's not a term people use.
No.
And, people use active metadata, right?
Active metadata,
but then everybody's like, well, what is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
And then I won't name names, but but people don't like that term, active metadata. That kind of seems like you're discriminating metadata. Is it active? Is it passive? Is like, wait, metadata is just metadata, right? I'm just, so that's just something that came to my attention. Like it says basically metadata analytics, and I think I'm going to start saying that whenever we have that discussion with folks, like active metadata. All you're doing is just the way we do data analytics. You're just doing metadata analytics. So guess what analytics you're trying to do your data? You're trying to do that over your metadata too, spotting trends and stuff like that. And you see those, and that's going to inform you about how you can fix things that are in the past, and hopefully also you can do some predictive things, maybe what you can do in the future. But okay, but I want to dive into one thing, which is what I was telling him, my drum roll, my question that I always bring up, or how do we avoid boiling the ocean? Because this seems like this, we take the same pattern as data analytics. It's like, oh, just give me all my data, and I'm going to put it into something, and we have data scientists who are going to come up with all these insights, blah, 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 right? I mean, this was the whole story 10 years ago, right? And then you can feel like, oh, we just need to capture all the metadata, and we're going to find. I call that success that's a path for failure. So how do we avoid boiling the ocean? But in other ways, is like, what are those low-hanging fruits to be able to kind of analyze metadata? And then there's so many questions here, but is there a template that we could use is there's like a low-hanging fruit template that is applicable across all organizations, or is it really it depends?
Yeah, there's a few questions in there.
Yeah, go rant.
That the first point about boiling the ocean, I think, it's a really interesting one, because I think where we are now as an industry, active metadata, or as we can call it, metadata analytics, it feels to me like a much more intuitive term for what it is. I think if it had been coined with that title, it would have been easier for a lot of people to understand in the first instance. But if we kind of think about what organizations should be thinking about doing today versus what they might be able to do in the future, because a lot of these use cases are, let's say, immature. There's not many examples of them being deployed in real businesses yet. There are some, and there are some good examples along the lines of the things that I described earlier, but there's not vast numbers of them, and yet the principle of being able to activate your metadata and being able to gain insight from your metadata is something that I think is going to be incredibly valuable, to the point of being a differentiator for businesses in future. So kind of today, how do you not boil the ocean, but how do you achieve a balance between not boiling the ocean and making sure you've got kind of the right technologies, processes in place to capture metadata that you might need to make some use of in the future. And I think there's probably a couple of answers to how you address that. So the first thing is, like, I would say with everything that almost I ever talk about in the data space, don't do something if you can't see some value behind it. If there isn't some value you're trying to unlock, so look for challenges or opportunities within your business where you know there's existing pain, or where you know you could be more efficient with something. So if we go back to things like the recovery or prevention of issues, if you're constantly having issues because of like failures somewhere in your end-to-end kind of data life cycle, then maybe that's a good use case for kind of some of those observability failure detection type metadata use cases. Similarly, if you've got teams that are constantly churning out reports and dashboards and pieces of analysis, and you suspect that some of those aren't being used, then that's a good use case to start sort of, well, okay, let's have a look at what the metadata tells us. And first of all, you don't need to like attach some big complex technical process to that. Just first of all, let's just have a look at what we've got and analyze it a little bit and say, right, manually, well, okay, is this telling us something? Could this help us cut out some of those that unnecessary work? So dead simple. Start small, start simple, and start by as you would with, like, I guess, any piece of analysis. Start by kind of POCing it and just understanding whether it's likely to deliver you any value before you try and put it into production. The other end of that spectrum, though, is I think it's becoming fairly evident that you will be able to gain some value from this in the future. So when you're thinking about, as an organization, investing in your technology landscape, making decisions that so metadata should be a part of evaluating technologies that you bring in. So you bring in an application, an ERP or something into your organization that's going to provide you the functionality that you need and play an important role in your organization. You should be evaluating that as well as on the kind of the functional and non-functional aspects that you might traditionally evaluate it on. Can it expose its metadata? Can it expose information about how people are interacting with things? Can it expose the definitions of the data that are in there? So it's part of this is about making sure you're set up for success in future. And
that's an excellent point. And actually, again, I never realized that what should go focus on, right? You're going to buy a new tool or whatever, like evaluation criteria there should be is like how can you grab all that metadata, because you may not know what you're going to be using it for today, but at the end that's something that can be helpful later on, and you don't want to get tied kind of your hands tied with like, well, there's the stuff I want to know, but you're not giving it to me, right? So
yeah. I mean, this kind of flips things on its head a little bit, because we don't often put our vendor hat on, but I'll put the vendor hat on for a second, right? Obviously, Data.World is a catalog and governance company. A lot of times the dynamic is, oh, I have this weird system, and can you please catalog it, right? And we're like, we already support 80 different targets, and like, do we really need that as the 81st? And of course, everybody wants their tools, right? Everybody wants their tools supported. But a way to kind of flip that on its head a little bit, and to connect it to the point that you just made, Mike, is that as you're building out your stack, as you're making these decisions about technologies, maybe you should be asking the question not always of your metadata system, but actually of your data system, to say, hey, when I choose, let's just pick a category here, my BI tool, right? When I'm choosing a BI tool, does it have a metadata API? What metadata does it collect? Does it have, what kinds of metadata, right? Does it have only technical metadata, or does it expose usage metadata? Does it expose operational metadata? Does it expose semantic metadata, right?
Yeah. And to add to that, I think it also flips. We talk about the whole shift left. We should go do the work, right? And then, so think about it, those tools, those vendors that you're doing, like there's people who are putting in effectively metadata inside of these tools, and how do we know that they're modeling things incorrectly or weirdly or whatever, right? So we're like, oh, we have some SaaS application, a CRM tool, whatever, right? And it's super flexible. I can do whatever I want. Okay, so you're setting it up, but the way you are setting things up, right? The fields, the new fields that you're adding and so forth, that's metadata too that is going to get consumed further down. And then later on, people are complaining, well, that thing broke over here because of this field's overchanged over here, but it's not a field in a database. It's like you're consuming the field from the actual source of a SaaS tool, which is still a proprietary tool or whatever, but it had a flexibility for you to actually decide what to go put into that. But I think we're like, oh, that's just a field. I'm like, well, we should probably put a little bit more importance in that. So what I'm loving about this conversation, and these are like really small things, but you put them all together, like this is what it means to treat what I call treat knowledge as a first-class citizen, right? Knowledge, metadata, context, all of this comes together. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm just adding this one thing. Like, no, it flows through everything, just like metadata flows through everything, and it just gives us that extra context to understand so much stuff about what this stuff means. So,
it's totally right. That there's a really interesting point in there that done well and done at scale, and you can maybe caveat this by saying, well, okay, organizations only hold that they only hold as data a certain proportion of the thinking and things that goes on within the organization, but it's certainly a big proportion. So the value of that data and the metadata that surrounds that data is potentially very, very high. But if you're able to analyze at scale what's going on in your data landscape, what's going on in your data ecosystem, you're able to an extent to assess how far your organization's data kind of represents the reality of your organization. So your example about data model and field changes in a system, you might be able to discover that, right, okay, someone set up a field called telephone number in this application over here, but actually what we're finding is what it looks like in that field is some credit card numbers, because they follow the pattern of a credit card number. So there's your system, the design that went into that system just no longer matches the requirement that the business has, which appears to be to store an extra credit card number. I'm hoping no one's doing this, right? This is terrible practice, right? But like you're spotting that design decisions that you made no longer actually align with the needs of the business, and so you're able to take action and perhaps remedy some of those design decisions as well. There's a big kind of school of thought about being like design versus analysis led in your in design of data solutions. So like my background has been designing master data management solutions. That's where I started in the data space, and I know from doing that the designs and the solutions are only as good as our understanding of the business that we're designing it for, and often that relies on the people that we're talking to and the samples of data that they provide. And if we have an incomplete picture, we might not end up with the greatest design, or at least a design that matches their business requirement perfectly. So the power of metadata to help actually aid design is also an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, you had it. I didn't get to catch it right here, but I'll go back to minute 24. You had a great soundbite there about like the design of the systems are just as best as you're talking to people, you figure out what the stuff is, right? Otherwise, it's just it's your world, and that's different around that. So, so what does good look like here? And in an ideal scenario, or in your experience, what you've been seeing, things that you're like, wow, this, I'm proud, like this is really, this is great, like this providing business value and everything. Like, what does good look like there, and how much of that is actually tooling versus, again, the people, process, and strategy. And just to kind of go back to one of the use cases, kind of to be very simple, is like you say, okay, a team is churning out all reports, and you suspect they're not being used. Like, I could just go into the Tableau or BI analytics tool and just go see the last amount of views, and I can, like, well, nobody's been looking at that stuff, right? So I don't have to get that sophisticated around these things, right? So back to, what does good look like, and how much is it technology versus the social side?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, like, there is a significant technology component to this, right? There's we are talking about technologies that are generating, consuming, analyzing metadata so obviously that's a big part of it. I think so. When we talk about what good looks like, so to your point, yeah, I can go in and scan any database worth its salt and find out how often tables have been accessed, and I can get a level of metadata out of there that I could potentially use to drive some analysis. I think where I would say that there's kind of a level up from that is where an organization has kind of it understands and is investing in the value of metadata. First of all, there's a recognized importance of that metadata. Secondly, that they're looking at the breadth of their landscape and not at like one individual database or report or system in isolation, albeit there's that's still maybe not a bad place to start if you haven't got anything. They're looking at the breadth of their landscape. And that and probably this brings us back round to the idea of data catalogs again, is that that they're probably also in a place where they've invested in kind of more the more traditional data catalog use cases, and they've got people interacting with the data catalog, because that again it's driving some interaction with the metadata that you have. You're likely to, for example, if you've got people who are able to log into a data catalog and search for the type of data that they're looking for, and it bring up the different data assets and data products, however we describe them, that are relevant to them. That's a better experience. They're more likely to pick the right things to use. You're going to get better quality of metadata out of that scenario, because you're not just dealing with people who go to one system because it's the only one that they know, discard what's in there because it's not what they need. You're dealing with a more joined up data estate in the first place. So so that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but to go back to your point, it's definitely part cultural, and I think having a culture in place where the sort of data community within an organization are interacting with a data catalog, they are engaged with their data, and they're getting value from some of the metadata that's already around. You will gain better, I think, better quality metadata and better insight from that metadata in that sort of culture.
Are there certain use cases that you think that organizations should try to tackle first when it comes to active metadata? And is there sort of an ordering here? Like, do you do passive metadata first before you do active metadata, or can you kind of approach it where you do active metadata but you start on something small and specific first? Curious about your thoughts on use cases and focus.
Yeah, it goes back to, what are the use cases that you see when of good?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with the kind of order that you do things, and this goes back to talking about that kind of embedding the processes and culture, which says anything we do, we're going to be thinking about the metadata that we can gather from it. So let's start with, can we do passive or active? Well, almost by definition, you've got to do passive before you do active, because you need the passive metadata to analyze. And but you could capture the passive metadata on a much, from a much smaller subset of your estate, and perform some analysis over it, and still get some value from that, and still be able to deliver real value. And actually, maybe that's quite a good approach in tackling active metadata use cases, because, as we've said, it's a potentially confusing term. You take this to the leadership of your organization, they're probably going to say, well, what the hell are you on about? Why is that important to me? Mm-hmm. But if you can say, actually, we utilize active metadata to prevent all of these failures which would have cost us X, or we've used active metadata to reduce the spend on dashboard development or report development or whatever by this much, then we start to be able to kind of give some tangible examples and use it as a bit of a kind of shining light for doing similar things in other parts of the organization. But the things that I'd say is that, so back to my point before, I'd always look for things that are going to drive some value, and think about how mature you are today as an organization and how ready you are to do some of this stuff. So right, let's take the kind of data issue prevention use case. Mm-hmm. If you know today that you're not capturing any metadata from any of your data solutions, or maybe one or two in isolation, you're not doing anything with it. You don't have a data catalog in place. You don't have anyone whose job it is to kind of make sure metadata is captured and analyzed. You're probably at a relatively low level of maturity in this space. And so if you want to pursue some kind of like proactive maintenance type of use case, you're probably going to want to start in a small area where you've already got problems today, where you see challenges, and then build it out from there. You can then put a roadmap where you gather the passive metadata, a limited subset of your passive metadata, you perform some analysis over the top of it that's relevant to that use case and to the scenarios you're trying to prevent, and you try to demonstrate some value of actually preventing those scenarios from happening. If you try to do your whole estate, you'll be at it for years, and it'll be a long time before you deliver any value in any in any use case.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple of areas of potential low-hanging fruit here. Like, one of them you mentioned was, reducing spend on dashboard development, or focusing it on more high-value kind of areas, right, where it's going to have a bigger impact. Another that you're mentioning is around, surfacing data issues, and maybe accelerating the time to resolve. And a way that you don't boil the ocean there is maybe you focus it on those places where you have challenges, and maybe where you have, critical pathways of data for your organization. Are there any other low-hanging fruit that you might recommend that when
I want to add to this?
Yeah, Juan, go ahead.
I'm surprised I haven't heard anything about data discovery and search of finding data, because that's always
that passive, or is there a way to do that?
Well, I mean, it's related to the metadata, and you can argue it's like, well, I can't. I mean, the comments always here like, why do you need a catalog? Well, because we can't find our data. It's like, okay, we're trying to democratize data. We're trying to be data driven, so we need to find our data. I'm like, but it's interesting then in this conversation that we've had up to now, like, we haven't been talking about search and discovery of data.
Well, I guess where your kind of interesting active metadata use cases are in that space are things like well, your catalog is another source effectively for capturing metadata that can then be analyzed as well. So I mean, is it metadata? Are we talking here? Let's not go too crazy. But like, I come into catalog and I'm looking for a source of customer data. So I type in customer data. I'm presented with some sources, and I choose certain sources based on my needs. That journey that I've just been on is of interest to the organization, right? That tells the organization something about perhaps less interestingly, my habits. But if you extrapolate that to other people in the organization who are also using the catalog to access data, it says, well, what data are they trying to access? What are they searching for but can't find? Once they've been presented with a search result, what are they actually choosing to go and work on and analyze? And again, it's probably relating more back to the sort of the use case that talks about we talked about cost saving, but really it's directing your resources into the right place and directing your investments into the right place, so you're not wasting money on things that your organization just doesn't need, but perhaps you thought it did. So that becomes another really useful source of information, of metadata to analyze, to say, right, well, okay, what's the problem? Are people not accessing certain data sources because they're not good enough, or actually are they irrelevant? Should they be retired? Should we invest our efforts in improving them, or should we save money by retiring them? Where do we direct our spend? If everyone's looking for customer data all the time and no one's looking for supplier data or whatever, maybe we put more investment into improving our customer data management processes, our customer data analytics, whatever it is. So that's where I think the catalog becomes, it's absolutely crucial in this, but it also becomes itself an important source of metadata.
And so I find this super interesting, because the whole conversation about metadata and metadata analytics, and it's gotten really into more of what I call like the data ops side, right? It's like it's all about the operations or these things. And like now this whole search part is, in a way, as you just mentioned, the meta analytics, right? Like effectively it's like, okay, now you have this stuff inside of a catalog, and like now what you really want to go do is analyze the metadata of the catalog that has a metadata, that stuff, to go see what people are searching for and so forth, right? So but I mean, but it's so valid, because I mean, you still want to know where people are searching, where they're going and stuff like that. So anyway, that's just an interesting observation I'm seeing here, and I wonder, kind of, for folks who are listening, where do they stand, right? Are folks who are listening, are you more in that kind of operations side, or are you more on the the usage of the data? And this goes back to like the different personas, right? Are you more of the technical users, right, of a metadata catalog system, or are you more of the consumers? Because the consumers are going to be looking more, I mean, the way I perceive it is the consumers are going to be more looking for the search and discovery use cases, while the technical personas are more about the data ops and all this operations type of things. So it then goes back to like, what is the culture of an organization, right? It's like so anyways, I find it's really interesting to go see kind of how metadata is like so broad, and you can have like so many different angles. And I think depending on the maturity of an organization, I would argue that they probably will start more from like the technical side, like that's about right. And then because they want to get into that whole having the data that people can find, and having data products and their marketplace and all that stuff,
monetizing your data, and
So it's really interesting. Again, the dots I'm connecting is that our conversations have all been about more on the technical side, and it kind of makes sense, because if you're starting your journey, you're probably going to start with your technical side. But also, kind of the caution here is like, don't just stay on the technical side. You need to be able to get up to the business side. So
yeah, totally. I mean, the easiest analogy, if like the data products analogy, really helps here, is like if you're talking about real world products on a marketplace or an Amazon, or so whatever it is, you would naturally, as a manufacturer or a distributor of those products, you would want to analyze their performance, their sales performance, and do things about what you find in the analysis to maybe evolve your product range, or change the product sometimes, or whatever it is. That's a very natural thing for a product manufacturer to want to do. So why should it be any different for data products as a data producer of data products? It's the same analogy. You want to be able to analyze the data about that data to either change the portfolio of data products that are out there, or evolve the products themselves to be better or more tailored to the needs of the consumer.
This is interesting. I'm just thinking about So we've been talking about active metadata. We've been talking about different organizations that have some different strategies, different goals, different levels of maturity. One of the other topics that when we were preparing for this conversation today that we had talked about was around data fabrics.
Mm.
I'm curious, Mike, for you, what do you think of when you think data fabric? I think that's another one of those slightly ambiguous terms,
Yeah.
depending on which vendor or which company or organization is talking about it. What is a data fabric, and is there a tie-in here to active metadata when it comes to data fabrics?
Yeah, well, the first thing that kind of leapt into my head when you said, what do you think, what do you think of when you say data fabric, is active metadata. Like that is the first thing that I think, that for me is the only thing that makes data fabric, the only thing, the only thing that makes data fabric as a concept different to every other iteration of kind of ecosystem design approach that we've seen over the years. It's really the thing that stands out in the definition of data fabric from I don't know, logical data warehouse, or another like number of approaches
I
that can be
appreciate you
taken.
being forward and bold
Honest,
on
that's
that.
an honest and no
Because
BS
I
right
feel like
there.
there's
It's
so
like,
many people out there that are like, "Oh yeah, we're creating data fabric," and you say, "Okay, well, what are you doing?" And they say, "Well, we're making APIs and we're making really well formed tables in our data warehouse." It's like, well, isn't that just good warehouse design and good API design? Is that a fabric?
Totally.
for me, like, this is, you really articulated it very directly here about the data fabric is really about the active metadata, about which means like you're actually capturing metadata, you're doing an analysis over that stuff, because otherwise it's just pure blah blah blah, and all you're doing is just the same old data integration, and you're probably changing some things, right, some technology, but the same, you're just more fancy data integration, right? But I think you take the data integration and you're improving it with best principles and so forth, but you're actually adding that layer of metadata. So that's what I really love to. But sorry, please continue, because this is a really great connection that we need to make more.
No, I think so. Maybe this is probably a good point to talk about sort of futures and why active metadata becomes so important to data fabric. And there's got to be a bit of a leap of faith conceptually into what could possibly be achieved in the future. But if you kind of think of a sort of situation where you have such a good handle over your metadata and are able to analyze it, to apply AI techniques on top of it, to almost make your end-to-end data ecosystem to an extent self-evolving, that it can spot problems with itself and solve them. It can recognize where your various business systems don't quite meet the needs of the business, and maybe even make changes to them automatically to bring them back into line. That's the type of thing that data fabric in theory could deliver with technological evolution, and there's a good few steps forward before we're at that point. But that's the kind of, I think, utopia we need to be thinking towards. And so when I talk about kind of making sure organizations are preparing themselves for this, and making sure that the systems that they have are able to expose metadata, and that they've got catalogs that can consume that metadata, they've got tools that can analyze the metadata, that's why I'm saying that thing. Because if at the point that this starts to kind of become a reality, if you're in a position where you're still haven't even got a handle on your metadata at all, you're a long way behind a lot of companies, and then we will see significant differences in organizational agility and the ability to adapt to kind of change that as we've all seen over the past few years, that change can hit us and completely sideswipe us from our plans. So
Yeah, we have to be resilient and not just overemphasize efficiency. And I like what you're saying here around, some of the most exciting use cases that we want to unlock around data that honestly we've been talking about for decades now, and we thought maybe would happen with the Hadoop craze, and it didn't, unfortunately, right? Things like self-healing and automated data operations and unlimited scalability and just AI that gets unlocked, like all these different pieces. They can only happen if you take a data fabric approach, and they can only happen if that data fabric approach actually leverages active metadata, because metadata is the key that unlocks all these different use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, maybe just to go back on the data fabric thing, I certainly don't see data fabric as being single platform for everything. It's almost more about thinking in a joined up way. And yes, okay, you need an architecture in place, and a huge component of data fabric is the architecture, but it's about treating your entire data landscape as an ecosystem, recognizing that your analytics tool over here has all of these dependencies on perhaps the operational systems that created the data, perhaps master data management systems. It's got there's data warehouses, data lakes, there's integration technology, all of those things. They're acting together as one, and one thing over here has an impact on multiple things over there. It's a bit like a butterfly effect. And if you're not kind of looking at, okay, well, when I think about the performance of my data technologies and my data in general, if I'm not looking at that whole ecosystem, I'm missing a trick. I'm missing something out. And Fabric really is kind of an approach to an all-encompassing ecosystem that leverages active metadata.
Mike, I want to say that this conversation here has been very, for me personally, very, very illuminating, because you've taken these, even like you've helped me rephrase the words that I say goes through my mind. I'm like, oh, this is just metadata analytics. So right? That's one thing here. And you described it too, is like this data fabric. It really is, when you put the metadata analytics and activating that metadata, like that's what makes a difference. Otherwise, it's the same thing. And I appreciate that kind of the honesty right there. And it's really, it's not a technology. It's really holistically putting it all together, and kind of how I'm seeing it and tying it to my words is, we treat data as a first-class citizen. We now need to treat metadata knowledge as a first-class citizen. And reminds me of all the stuff that like Mark Beyer at Gartner always says, right? Metadata has been screaming at us. I mean, I am a graph, and it's been connecting. All you're trying to go do is connect all this stuff all over the place. And that's why it's not one technology. It's not just one thing that you go by, because you're all you're trying to go do is just connect all this data stuff with all this metadata stuff and so forth. So yeah, this has been really illuminating. And for folks who are listening and they're like, I think this conversation is incredibly complementary to all the data fabric and active metadata stuff that you'll see kind of from the pundits and the analysts. So thank you very much.
That's a pleasure.
Well, hey, let's kick it off. We'll go to our lightning round right now. So we got questions lined up here, and I'll kick it off. So is your catalog the home and the hub for your metadata?
I think hub, yes, but metadata is everywhere, and I'm not sure that your catalog should attempt to capture every piece of metadata and analyze every piece of metadata.
That is a well-stated nuance there, and I think it's pretty important. Okay, second question. Can all organizations benefit from an active metadata approach?
I think I'll go a straight yes with that. Maybe in very small organizations, there might not just be enough data to gain any meaningful insight from yet. But generally, I think there'll be a case for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Sometimes people ask like, well, what industries are going to be untouched by AI? And you kind of be like, I don't know, plumbers? No, even plumbers, they're going to use, image recognition and stuff like that. It's like, active metadata kind of touches a lot, right?
All right, number 3. Who is the driver of this active metadata? Is it the governance team, the data engineering team, CDO office?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there is this comes back to kind of data culture, and so maybe CDO Office is the one that I'd lean towards. This all kind of goes back to, well, who owns things like data governance in an organization, who is responsible for the quality of data, all questions that we've been asking, I guess, for years, and there are different approaches and different valid, correct answers to. I think the important thing is recognizing that and developing a culture where we value metadata to the point where if we're making a change, if we're implementing some technology or new processes or integrations or whatever, we're always, a big component of that is thinking about, well, what metadata is it going to produce? Is that useful to us? How are we going to capture it and how are we going to analyze it?
I think that's good. Yeah. And somebody should be accountable and responsible for driving it, but it depends on your organization.
Yeah, it depends on the organization totally. And I think the fact that there is an accountability and that there is an interest and a desire to do something with it is way more important than who, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. All right, last lightning round question. This one's actually going to be an open-ended question. What do you think is the most important use case that you think that active metadata can unlock? So not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but the most important.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and it's going back to that futures thing again, but I think it's that self-improving ecosystem piece. And I know it's something we've already touched upon, but if you imagine how, the possibilities that you have there, and the amount of kind of directed effort that you can save on all of the things that we waste money in and on technology and data tools today by being in that utopian state. That's the most important use case we can address, but I don't think we can address it in full today. Right.
I like that. And maybe just to make one comment before we go to our takeaways here, that when you said that, my thought that I had in my head, so I used to study physics a lot. Now it's more a side hobby than a more direct passion. But, this concept of entropy, right? Like today, our data tools have entropy towards chaos. Like, the machine runs and it becomes chaos, right? But at some point, if we use metadata correctly, the entropy should actually go in the reverse direction. It should actually, your data systems should, as they work together, become more and more effective and orderly. We're not at that today, and how far it is, we don't know, but that's ideally what should be happening here.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a brilliant analogy for it.
Takeaway time. Tim, take us away with takeaways.
Oh, always so many takeaways. This is always the hardest part of the episode. We started off with, what is metadata? What is active metadata? What does this all kind of mean, right? And you said, Mike, that organizations create metadata all the time, right? Definitions of entities, attributes, data of how people are interacting with things, technologies interacting with things. Where did it flow? Did people like it? Did they view it? Did they rate it? Did they, what we've all kind of agreed on as an industry, as a broader world, right, is that like this is important information. You should put it somewhere. That place might be a catalog. It might be something a little more federated than that. And capturing it is one thing, but doing something with it is another. And it's really important that we do things with our metadata, right? Bottom line, put very simply. And, what does that mean? Do things with metadata? Well, maybe put simply, it's metadata analytics, right? Metadata automation is another phrase that comes to mind, although I know we've talked more about metadata analytics. And, the sort of buzzword term, I think, in the space is active metadata, right? And so we all kind of, talked about, active metadata, is that the best term or not? It's certainly the term folks are using, but it's really just metadata analytics. And if you use this metadata in an active way and actually analyze it, use it, you're going to get incredible value out of it, such as being able to spot patterns, being able to avoid data failures. When you use metadata in this way, you're going to be able to improve your data lifecycle, identify what's working, what's not working. This is where we need to go. Obviously, you shouldn't boil the ocean. And so you have to be careful about focusing your energy on where it's going to have the most impact for your culture, for your organization, for what matters for your maturity. But you should find what that use case is and take advantage of it. Metadata also should be part of the evaluation of the tools that you're bringing into the organization. So it's not just about, hey, we should collect the metadata for whatever we have. When you're choosing your ETL tools, when you're choosing your BI tools, when you're choosing your warehouses, think about, is that metadata coming out of those systems that we can use, that is operational, that maybe has social information? Make sure that you're gathering metadata. My thought, don't just ask what your metadata can do for your data tools, ask what your data tools can do for your metadata. Juan's thought, treat knowledge like a first-class citizen. So I love all that. Juan, what were your big takeaways?
Well, one of the things that we got into, like, what does good look like? So it's an organization that recognizes the value of metadata. They're looking at the breadth of their landscape, and they have a data catalog, right? They have that culture of a data community interacting with a data catalog. They're always looking for things that will drive value. And then it's something you're always considering what your maturity is and how you're increasing that maturity. Potential low-hanging fruits are reduce the spend on dashboard development or focus it on some more high-value areas. You can do that by analyzing your metadata, right? And then also surface the data issues to accelerate time to resolve, and start by knowing the places that you know that you have some challenges today. We got into that whole discussion, like, but what about data discovery and search? And I think that goes into, like, okay, that's something that may happen inside of your catalog now, or what are the user journeys, right? But in a way, it's like this metadata around there. I like how we talk about the orders of operations here, right? You want to embed processes and cultures that says, hey, everything we do needs to consider that metadata and what can we do with it? And almost by definition, you have to do that passive style of, like, let's just kind of gather all that metadata before you do any of that active stuff. But however, you can always start with the metadata from your part of your estate and then activate from those particular areas, kind of like an iterative approach. And then get into our discussion about data fabric. It's when you integrate active metadata, that metadata analytics, into your data infrastructure and architecture. If you are not doing that metadata analytics, you're not doing some data fabric. You're just doing the same old thing. So, and then what you're going to be able to get out of this activating the metadata, this metadata analytics, is that kind of that self-healing automations, more of these scalabilities. AI can actually unlock that incredible ways to be able to go improve your data infrastructure. Fabric is not just about a unified technology approach. It's more about treating your data landscape as an ecosystem and thinking holistically about it, especially the metadata. I think that was that final big tidbit right there, that nugget. Mike, how did we do? Anything we missed?
Wow, that was pretty. That was a pretty comprehensive summary. No, I don't think so. I think the one thing that I would maybe say to like businesses out there is just to restate that if you're not thinking about metadata and the potential of metadata, almost forget the word active metadata, just the potential untapped source of knowledge that you have in your business metadata. You probably should start thinking about it, and not because it's going to transform your business today, but because of the potential value it unlocks for you in future.
Well, I think this goes back to wrap up. We do our 3 questions, right? What's your advice? Who should you invite next? And what resources do you follow? I think you just gave great advice right there. So to follow up, who should we invite next?
Well, I mean, this is not intended as a plug for Amplifi, but I'd love to see my colleague Stuart Squires involved in a podcast in future. I think he, my background, kind of going far back, is technology. I'm I guess a technologist at heart, although I recognise, I guess, with most of the things that we talk about in the data space, that technology is only a small part of the answer. I think Stuart is comes from a perspective of changing a business to kind of deliver on that data culture, and is way more talented at that than I will ever be. So yeah, he would be a fantastic guest to have on, I think.
And then finally, what resources do you follow? people,
Well,
blogs, podcasts,
yeah.
books.
Bit, I mean, obviously, catalog and cocktails. But you mentioned, and this is what probably one that I would draw out. You mentioned earlier on Mark Beyer at Gartner. I really like the thinking that Mark presents and the sort of research that he's published. I think that has certainly influenced me quite a lot in the way that I think about some of these topics. Other than that, it's possibly an obvious one, but the original thinking that went into the kind of initial definition of data mesh. So Zhamak Dehghani, Martin Fowler, that body of research, I find that very, very interesting conceptually. And again, we can debate whether or not that's the right operating model for people till the cows come home almost. But as a piece of kind of thought leadership, I think it's quite an incredible sort of body of work.
Well, Mike, thank you so much, because this was, again, I think a fascinating complementary discussion of what you're hearing here. So I think what I want people is, like, if you're getting confused around the stuff, this is the episode to get you unconfused about active metadata data fabric. Thank you, Mike. As always, thanks to Data World, who lets us keep doing this years after years after years. And thank you, Mike. Again, looking forward to having keep these conversations going.
Absolutely. Thank you.